Hey church, and welcome to this week's small group. And we're back into Pulse University. Yay! And this week we're starting out talking about the final miracles of Jesus. We've been talking about the miracles of Jesus for a little while. Remember what we talked about on Sunday. What do we have to do to find healing? True healing comes only through faith in Jesus Christ. So we've been talking about the miracles of Jesus, and I want to start out the small group with this one question. Of all the miracle stories in the New Testament, which one is your favorite and why? Now I know that in probably just about every small group there was some smart aleck that said, my favorite is when Jesus turned the water into wine, right? Woohoo! And so here's what we're going to do. Each small group, I want you to come up to me on Sunday and rat out the person that was the smart aleck. My personal favorite was when the four friends brought their paralyzed friend to Jesus. And I love that story about them and their faith, but I also love the story of when Jesus proved that not only could he heal the man's body, but that he could also heal the man's soul as well. Well, today's story is the most powerful miracle that Jesus performs aside from the cross. So read John chapter 11, verses 1 through 7. And answer these questions. If you were Mary or Martha, how would you have interpreted Jesus' delay in coming? And what would you have thought about your friendship with Jesus? Imagine being Mary and Martha. You know about all the people that Jesus has healed. You've even heard the stories of how Jesus healed people right after they died and brought them back to life. So if someone you loved was sick and you had the opportunity to call in a favor from your buddy Jesus, would you do it? I know I would. If my kids were sick and I thought that they were going to die, and I had Jesus on speed dial, he'd be the very first person that I would call. But as painful as it was for them to watch their brother die, Jesus was working on their trust. He wanted them to trust in the Father rather than to trust in his own bodily presence. Why? Because Jesus knew that he wasn't going to be with them in his bodily presence much longer. So how would you define trust in your own words? And what are some reasons that you would find it difficult to trust God in this kind of circumstance? The truth of the matter is, sometimes Jesus delays. Sometimes he chooses to answer our prayers in ways that we don't like. And it's at this moment when we can choose either to deny Jesus because we don't like his answer, or we can grow deeper into our trust and faith and knowledge of him. Next, I want you to read John chapter 11. Skip ahead to verses 17 through 27. What is the difference between seeing Jesus as the giver of life and seeing Jesus as life itself? And how does Martha's declaration of faith compare to Peter's declaration of faith, who said, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God, in Matthew chapter 16, verse 16? Finally, we come to the shortest verse in the entire Bible. John 11:35. Jesus wept. Now, I know this verse by heart because when I was a kid and they wanted us to memorize one verse per week and they would give us candy if we remembered a verse, if you hadn't done your homework that week, for at least one of those weeks, you could just remember Jesus wept and they would have to give you candy. But that simple verse communicates so much. Read John chapter 11, verses 28 through 37. How does Jesus' expression of grief here communicate God's compassion for people who suffer? And what are some practical ways that we can grieve with those who grieve? I want you to imagine the smell that must have come out of that tomb when they opened it and a 4-day-old body was exposed to the world. And up until this point, Jesus had raised some people from the dead, but they had just died. This person was dead for 4 days. What we need to see in these verses is that Jesus can both resurrect us spiritually, but he can also resurrect us physically. Read John chapter 11, verses 38 through 44. In what ways does resurrection language also apply to us spiritually when we are saved? And why is it important to hold together the reality of spiritual resurrection and the hope of physical resurrection? Whenever we talk about Jesus doing miracles, I always ask the question, why does God heal one person and not another? I mean, surely there were other sick people in Israel during Jesus' time, yet he chose specific people to heal. Why? Why didn't he heal the other people? How come God allows the wicked people to prosper when the righteous suffer? These are painful questions. There's a couple things that I've learned, especially through this story. Number one, God's timing isn't our timing. You see, our perspective on time is different than his perspective on time. And number two, God's view of life isn't our view of life because he has a different perspective of life than we do. And we're so afraid of death, yet for God, that's how he draws us even closer to him. What difference does this story make in our lives today? And how does trusting God in difficult circumstances bring him glory? I know that this was a difficult small group, especially with some of us who are hurting right now. But I'm going to ask you to close in prayer and ask God to teach us to trust him, especially when it doesn't make sense. And remember the truth that we're driving home this week. True healing only comes through faith in Jesus. God bless you, and I'll see you on Sunday.